My son looked me in the eye at a table full of investors and introduced me as the contractor who handled the renovation work on this property, not as his father, not as the man who spent 32 years waking up at 5 in the morning to grade roads and pour concrete footing so he could have a better life than I did. Just the contractor. He said it with a smile, the easy practice kind, the kind you use when you've rehearsed a word so many times it no longer sounds like what it is. I shook the hand of the man beside me and let it go. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on my back porch in Knoxville, watching a mockingbird run through every song it knew from the top of my workshop roof when my son's girlfriend called me, crying, to say she was sorry. I told her to take her time. I already knew what she was going to say. I'd known for a while. My name is Clement, and I am 64 years old. I spent 32 years working for the Tennessee Department of Transportation as a civil engineer. Not the kind who sits in a glass office staring at blueprints, but the kind who walks the job site, gets mud on his boots, argues with subcontractors at 7 in the morning, and knows by the sound of concrete being poured whether it's going to hold or not. I retired 3 years ago. My wife, Laurel, died 8 months after I retired, which I have never fully decided was a coincidence or something else. She had been my reason for almost everything for 35 years. After she was gone, I kept the house on Sycamore Ridge Road, because leaving it felt like abandoning her a second time. I kept the roses she'd planted along the back fence. I kept the rocking chair on the porch where she used to sit in the evenings and read. And I kept going out to my workshop every morning, because the feel of wood under my hands was the closest thing I'd found to peace since that empty August when everything changed. My neighbor Mabel is 71 years old, a retired fourth-grade teacher who has lived 2 doors down since before my son could ride a bike without training wheels. She has the particular kind of sharp-eyed calm that comes from 30 years of managing 8-year-olds who believe the world begins and ends with their own feelings. She shows up unannounced, brings things she's made, biscuits with honey usually, or a jar of fig preserves she'd put up herself, and she asks questions in the direct way of someone who has long since decided that patience is a virtue, but time is not unlimited. She was the one who knocked on my workshop door the morning after I got back from Atlanta. "You look like you've been hit by something," she said. She set a plate of biscuits on the corner of my workbench and looked at me with those clear brown eyes. "But you're still standing, so it wasn't fatal." I told her what had happened. The grand opening of my son's commercial real estate firm, Lawson Group Capital, a name I hadn't known until I saw it printed on the glass door. He'd rented a full floor of a building on Peachtree Street, catered the thing properly, invited investors and what he called strategic partners, and he told me to dress business casual and come down for the afternoon. "Come celebrate with me, Dad. It'll mean a lot." What he had not told me was that he intended to introduce me to every person in that room as anything except his father. It was the 3rd time he shook my hand, instead of hugging me, that I fully understood something was different. Not strained, not awkward in the usual family way, different in the deliberate architectural sense, something that had been planned. He walked me through the room the way you walk someone through a space they have no real investment in. He pointed out the catering setup, the view, the conference rooms, with their glass walls and their names on brass plates. And then his lead investor, a tall man in a gray suit named Braddock, extended his hand and my son said, "This is Clement. He handled the finish work on our renovation. Really brought the wood panel detail together." I shook the man's hand. I smiled. I said it was a pleasure. Braddock said something about craftsmanship and moved on. My son moved with him, and I stood in the middle of a room my son had built his name on, and understood, quietly and completely, that I was a prop. I was a piece of scenery specific enough to be described, and convenient enough to keep anyone from asking further questions. I left after 45 minutes. My son walked me to the elevator, thanked me for coming, told me I could validate my parking at the front desk. No hug, no "I'm glad you were here," just a nod, and the particular look of a man whose attention is already back inside the room where it matters. I validated my parking and drove home to Knoxville. 2 days later, he called. It started the way calls like that always start, a voice calibrated to sound casual, unhurried, like there was nothing underneath it. He talked about the opening, how well it had gone, the follow-up meetings he had lined up, and then he shifted registers the way water shifts temperature when you move through a current, gradually until you're cold before you notice you've changed. He said he had a gala coming up, a private investor dinner at a hotel in Buckhead, 40 people, the kind of evening where the relationships were made that eventually became the deals. He said he'd been thinking carefully about it, and he didn't think it would be the right environment for me. I asked him what he meant. He used the word optics. He said the investor group had a specific expectation of the people they worked with, that he'd been very deliberate about the image he'd built, and that having someone with my, He paused, choosing. Background in the room might send a signal he wasn't in a position to manage at a critical stage. He said, "You understand, right? This is a big moment for me." I said I understood. I told him to enjoy his gala, and I hung up and sat in my workshop for a long time without touching any of my tools, which is something I almost never do. 2 days after that, I found the papers. My son had come down the previous weekend, a short visit, dropping off some things Laurel's sister had sent from storage. He'd asked to use my printer, said his wireless setup was giving him trouble. I'd shown him where it was in the study and thought nothing more of it. I went to print something on Tuesday morning and found pages jammed at the back of the output tray. 3 of them. I pulled them free, intending to set them aside, and then I didn't. The top page was an email. The sender was my son. The recipient was a name I didn't recognize. Rafe, just a first name. The way you save someone's number when you talk to them, so often their last name becomes unnecessary. I read it standing at the desk. Then I read it again, slower. It came together in pieces, the way large things always do. My son had been telling the Braddock Group, his primary investors, that he came from a family with established real estate holdings across East Tennessee. He had specifically described his father as a retired property developer with substantial commercial assets in Knox and Blount counties. He had implied, in language just vague enough to survive a quick read, that family capital would be available as collateral for the flagship project, a mixed-use development in Chattanooga they were trying to close. What he needed from me, the email explained, was a power of attorney, a broad one, the kind that would give him legal access to my accounts and authority over my property interests. He told Rafe he planned to bring it to me on an upcoming visit. He said, and this was the sentence I read 3 times before I set the pages down, that his father was the kind of man who trusted him and signed things without asking too many questions. I stood at the window and looked at the roses along the back fence. Laurel would have already cut them back by now. She always timed it to the first week of October, same year after year, so predictable you could set a calendar by it. Then I picked up my phone and called Langston. Langston and I had met at the University of Tennessee 40-odd years ago. He took the law school path, I took the engineering path, and we'd spent the better part of 4 decades arguing about whose choice turned out smarter while fishing the Clinch River every September. He had a small estate and property law practice on Gay Street, the kind that handles the real business of real people, rather than the abstract business of large institutions. He was 62, deliberate, with the kind of stillness that comes from decades of listening carefully to what people said and noticing everything they left out. He met me that afternoon. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his pen. "Clement," he said, "I need to ask you 2 things directly." He asked about my estate. I told him the truth. The house on Sycamore Ridge, paid off, assessed at a figure considerably larger than my son appeared to understand. The retirement accounts from 32 years of state employment. The proceeds from a parcel of land my father had left me in Loudoun County that I'd sold 8 years ago and invested quietly. I had never corrected my son's assumption that my finances were modest. He had assumed, from the house in the workshop and the 10-year-old pickup in the driveway, that I was comfortable in a small way. He was wrong about the scale. He did not know he was wrong. Langston asked about my will. I told him it dated to 2011, naming my son as the primary beneficiary. He wrote 3 things on his legal pad, numbered and clean: new will, asset protection trust, document everything. A power of attorney in Tennessee, properly executed, gives the holder broad authority, he said. Your accounts, your property, the ability to enter into contracts on your behalf. If your son presents you with one and you sign it, even willingly, even with good intentions, he gains legal access to everything you own. If that Chattanooga project goes sideways, your assets could be pledged as collateral without any further approval from you, and once that's done, the recourse is difficult. We spent 3 hours in that office. I left with a new will, a trust structure that required 2 attorneys to modify, and an appointment to deliver every document of consequence to Langston's fireproof office safe by the end of the week. I also left with a cashier's check for $15,000, which I had prepared 6 weeks earlier as a wedding gift for my son and the woman he was planning to marry, a woman named Sloan, whom I had met exactly twice, at family events where my son had kept me at the edges of the conversation without anyone in the room quite noticing he'd done it. I did not tear the check yet. I put it in the kitchen drawer and went to bed. My son showed up 9 days later on a Saturday morning. He knocked, which he did not usually do, and he was holding a box from Bia's Bakery on Market Square, a place we had gone together every Saturday morning when he was small. He always ordered the same thing back then, a glazed donut and orange juice. He'd drink the juice in 3 long pulls, and then look at me with that open, gap-toothed grin, the one that disappeared sometime around middle school and never entirely came back, and say again, and I would say, one is enough, and he would say, but Dad, and I would order him a second one every time. He'd driven 45 minutes out of his way to stop at a bakery he hadn't set foot in since he was a teenager. He'd done it because he remembered exactly what it meant. That kind of detail is what care preparation looks like. Come on in, I said. He complimented the workshop. He asked about the roses. He set the bakery box on the counter and opened it with both hands in the offering way, the way you present something you want to be noticed. I took a glazed donut. I leaned against the counter, and I watched him move through my kitchen the way you watch something performing a version of itself that used to be real. He talked for 12 minutes, the wedding venue they were considering. A deal in Chattanooga that was coming together beautifully, a gala that had gone better than expected. Then he set his coffee mug down and reached into his jacket pocket. So listen, Dad, I've been meaning to talk to you about something practical, something I should have sorted out a long time ago. With everything moving forward, the wedding, the business, I want to make sure you're protected, if anything ever happened to you. He placed the document on the counter, several pages, dense, professionally formatted. Durable power of attorney, state of Tennessee. It's just a standard thing, he said, peace of mind. So if you're ever in the hospital or just unavailable, I can step in and handle whatever needs handling, the banking, the house, so you don't have to worry. Peace of mind. He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed until it sounds like you believe it. I looked at the document. I looked at my son's face, open, warm, doing a thorough impression of the face I had raised from nothing. I thought about a line in an email I had read standing at my desk 11 days ago, the kind of man who signs things without asking too many questions. I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and took out the cashier's check. $15,000. His name, written 6 weeks ago by a man who understood less than he does now. I held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I tore it down the center. The sound it made was clean and absolute, the sound of something that has been decided rather than performed. I set both halves on the counter beside the power of attorney. I'm not going to sign that, I said. I need you to take it with you when you leave. The warmth left his face in stages. What came underneath was something I recognized from 20 years of dinners where I hadn't given him what he'd come for. Something flat and recalculating, running numbers on a future he'd already spent in his head. Dad. He said it quietly, like he was testing how much weight the word could carry. You don't understand what you're turning down. I understand exactly what I'm turning down. I kept my voice level. I'd had days to decide how I'd sound in this moment, and level had been the decision. His jaw set. He picked up the document and folded it back into his jacket with quick, precise movements. He did not touch the bakery box. He did not say goodbye. He walked to the front door and pulled it open hard enough that the brass knocker struck its plate twice on the way back. I listened to his car back down the driveway. I listened to it take the curve at the bottom of Sycamore Ridge faster than the limit allows. I picked up the two halves of the check, I held them over the trash can and let them go. Then I went out to my workshop and spent the rest of the afternoon on a blanket chest I'd been building for no particular reason. I measured twice, cut once. By the time the light went, the joinery was clean. Mabel appeared at my side gate at dusk, carrying nothing for once. Just herself in the Sunday cardigan, moving with the careful economy of a woman who has spent 71 years learning what she can ask of her knees. She sat on the workshop step and didn't speak for a while. We watched the mockingbird make one last pass over the feeder before settling somewhere for the night. He came today, she said, not a question. Yes. She nodded slowly. She looked at her hands in her lap. That boy borrowed $300 from me last month, she said quietly. Said he needed it for your birthday. Said he wanted to do something special and was a little short. The cold that moved through me then was not anger. Anger would have been easier. This was the settling kind, the kind that sinks in slow and stays there, like the cold that gets into old joints in November and doesn't leave until spring. Mabel, I started. I don't want it back. Her voice was firm and final on this. I know what it was. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the full picture. She looked at me directly. The rest, that's not mine to carry. What I want to know is whether you're going to be all right. I looked at the workshop. At the blanket chest half finished in the lamplight, the proportions right, the white oak honest and steady. At Laurel's rocking chair, visible past the gate on the porch. At the tools on their hooks, in exactly the order I'd kept them for 20 years. I think I have been all right, I said. Longer than I've been giving myself credit for. I just kept waiting for a version of him that I'm not sure ever existed the way I remembered it. Mabel reached over and put her hand over mine on the step rail. Her hand was smaller than I expected. the skin thin at the knuckles, the kind of hand that has held a lot of other people's difficult things over the years and is not finished doing it. Your wife used to say you were the steadiest man she knew, she said. She also said you were the worst at asking for help. Both true, I said. Mabel laughed. The short, warm kind, the kind that belongs to porch steps and October evenings and the specific comfort of people who know each other well enough not to have to explain what they mean. She stayed another hour, and then she went home, and I sat alone until the stars came through. The investor gala was the following Thursday. I know because I'd written it on the refrigerator calendar. Not because I intended to attend, but because I needed to know when the timeline my son had built for himself would run out. Langston had said it plainly. He's not patient. He needed that document before the event. When he didn't get it, the pressure would move somewhere. I was in the workshop Thursday evening when the first alert came through on my phone. A local Atlanta news account I'd followed without thinking much about it. The headline read, "Prominent investor group withdraws from Buckhead real estate venture following due diligence findings." I went inside and sat down in front of the television. The story that assembled over the next 2 hours was not the kind of unraveling that gets cameras outside a venue the way certain stories do. It was quieter than that, and in some ways worse. Braddock had hired a due diligence firm, standard practice for a commitment of this size. 3 weeks of verification. The firm had looked at the claim that Lawson Group Capital's founder came from a family with significant commercial real estate holdings in East Tennessee. What they found, of course, was a 64-year-old retired civil engineer with a paid-off house on Sycamore Ridge Road and a workshop full of hand planes and chisels. The report had been delivered to Braddock before the gala. He'd attended anyway and brought his attorney. A spokesperson's statement confirmed the group had identified material inaccuracies in the project's disclosed collateral structure and had withdrawn from the agreement effective immediately. 2 lines, clean and final, the way a document sounds when the lawyers have already done their work. I turned the sound down. I sat in the quiet and let the thing finish arriving, the way you have to let a large thing fully land before you can decide what it weighs. I thought about my son at 22, graduating from UT Knoxville. He'd told me the ceremony was small, not worth the drive down. I'd watched the live stream on my laptop at the kitchen table, the coffee going cold while I waited for his name to be called. When it came through the tiny speakers, I'd clapped once, alone in Laurel's kitchen, and then closed the laptop and sat in a house that was very quiet. I had told myself it was fine. He was young and building something. There was still time. There is always, I have found, a certain number of years in which a father tells himself there is still time. My phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. "Mr. Clement?" A woman's voice, careful and low. "This is Sloan." She stopped. I heard her take a breath, slow it, start again. "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since this afternoon," she said. "I don't know if there's a version of this that comes out right, but I think I need to start with I'm sorry." I told her to take her time. She told me she'd found something 2 weeks earlier, a document in the printer queue at their apartment, a presentation prepared for the Braddock Group that my son had sent and forgotten to collect. The family background section described his father as a retired commercial developer with substantial holdings across East Tennessee. It described the family estate as a resource positioned to backstop the investment. She said she'd asked him about it. He'd told her it was a simplification, that I was too modest to present myself properly, that he was just giving investors the context they needed to see the real picture. She'd believed him. She'd wanted to believe him. She said she'd found out the truth this afternoon, standing in a hotel lobby in Buckhead in her best dress, surrounded by people who were looking at their phones and quietly leaving. "Did he tell you things about me?" I asked. "About why I wasn't at any of his events?" A pause. "He said you'd had some difficulties," she said quietly, "since your wife passed, that you sometimes had trouble following conversations, that it was better for you to stay comfortable at home, that he was managing your situation, and it was a genuine sadness for him." I let that settle. I let it move through me completely, not rushing past it, not shutting it down. I let it sit there in my chest exactly as heavy as it was, and then after a long moment I let it go. "He built a story about a man who doesn't exist," I said. "Yes." Her voice was steady now, and I believed it because I needed the story to be true, because the version he told me about his family made sense of things I didn't want to look at directly. She was quiet for a moment. "I owe you more than I gave you," she said. "From the beginning, I should have asked to know you for real, not the version he presented." "You were working with the information you had," I said. "That's not the same as what he did. He had all of it and chose differently." A long pause. "He's going to blame you," she said. "When he processes this, he's going to need somewhere to put it." He's done that before, I said. He might do it again. And then I stopped. And then maybe he won't. I don't know anymore what he's capable of in either direction. But I stopped trying to manage both sides of that a few weeks ago. That's the most honest thing I can tell you. She was quiet for a moment. You're not what he described, she said. No, I said, I'm not. She said goodbye. I said goodbye. I set the phone on the side table and sat in my living room with the television muted and the evening dark outside the window and Laurel's rocking chair empty across the room the way it had been for 3 years. Mabel was standing in my doorway. I didn't know when she'd arrived, but she crossed the room and sat in the rocking chair without asking, which was the right thing to do. She didn't speak. I didn't need her to. After a while, she said, "Do you want to tell me?" I told her. She listened the way she always listened, with the careful stillness of someone who had learned that the most important things live in the spaces between the words, not in the words themselves. When I finished, she looked at the armrests beneath her hands. "That poor foolish boy," she said, not meanly, the way you say it when you're watching something that could have been different and wasn't. I nodded. "And you?" she said. I looked through the window at the workshop, at the blanket chest, half finished in the lamplight, the white oak solid and true, in the way of something that knows what it is. "I'm all right," I said. "I think I've been all right. I just had to stop waiting for a version of him I kept expecting to come back through the door." Mabel rocked slowly. "You remember the summer Lawson was 9, she said, "when he took boards from your lumber pile to build a fort in my backyard without asking, and when you found out he showed up with $11.40 and laid it on your workbench, like it was the most serious transaction of his life." I remembered. "You matched it," she said. "You gave him back the $11.40 and told him the lumber was an investment in good engineering." I smiled, first time all day that it came without effort. "I remember that," I said. Mabel nodded, rocking. "I don't know what happened to that boy," she said, "but I'm allowed to be sad about it." "So am I said. We sat together while the October dark settled fully around the house, and the mockingbird woke once more somewhere in the yard and ran through a few borrowed notes, and then went quiet again. Mabel stayed until the clock read 9. When she left, she paused at the door. "You built yourself a solid foundation, Clement," she said. "A man with a solid foundation doesn't fall when something pushes. He just finds out where his walls are." She went home through the side yard. I listened to her porch door. Then I went out to the workshop. I pulled the lamp close over the blanket chest. The white oak was heavy and honest, the joinery clean at every corner. I ran my hand along the top rail and felt where it was true, and where it still needed a final pass. I picked up my hand plane. I have spent my whole career building things meant to hold weight. Bridges, road beds, foundations sunk deep into ground that shifts with the seasons. I know the difference between something that looks solid and something that is solid. The difference is not visible from the outside. It's in the structure underneath, in the choices made before anyone could see them, in the materials used when no one was watching, to see whether you cut corners or held the line. My son built something on what he wished were true, and on what he needed other people to believe, and for a while it held the shape of the real thing. But structure built on wishes meets the same outcome eventually. The only variable is timing. I worked until nearly midnight. When I finally set the plane down and ran my hand across the surface one last time, it was smooth and level, and exactly what I'd intended it to be. Outside, the mockingbird had gone quiet. The roses along the back fence were shapes in the dark. The rocking chair on the porch held the particular stillness of something that waits without knowing it's waiting. I covered my tools, turned off the lamp, and walked back to the house under a sky full of Tennessee stars, the kind that only show up this clearly when you're far enough from the city lights to remember what dark actually looks like. Some things you fix, some things you let run their full course, and some things, the good things, the true things, the things built right from the beginning, you just come back to every morning, and they're still there, holding. The chest came out exactly right.